Ahmed John, this is Yahya.
Then after chai comes love. And the love is not just something that we find by clicking on a link. The chai leads us to love, and the love is something that we bring with us, inshallah. And then there is the prayer, which is ultimately something that we're going to aspire to do in every breath as we go along life's journey. But if there are some times where it's a little easier to sense that sense of serenity, of being in a state of prayer, then all the lovelier. So as friends are trickling in, let me invite you to go ahead and mute your microphone if yours is not already muted. It will help a little bit with our acoustics and making sure that friends can hear one another a little bit better. When we go into our small groups, I think at that time you will be unmuting, inshallah. And as we do in almost every session, we're going to begin by listening to some sacred music. The theme for the gathering for today is not only the life and the teachings, but also the passing of Maulana Rumi. December 17th is the day that for most of the last century has been celebrated as the anniversary, the Urs of Maulana Rumi. And it's a beautiful occasion. There have been some years where I've had the great blessing of going in person to Konya and being together with tens of thousands of other lovers. But as we're going to see, one of the themes that Rumi talks about is, he says, don't look for me in the soil. Do not look for me in the earth. Rather, take any teaching, any poem, anything from me that has ever brought you a sense of khoshi. And khoshi is joy, is wellness. Take anything from me that has brought you a sense of joy, a sense of being well, open it up. Examine what is inside of it, and there you will find me, not buried in some soil, but a light and a presence that is contained inside your own very heart. And of course, along with our friends from the South Asian tradition, the Chishti tradition, the followers of Rumi and the followers of the Chishti order are probably the two Sufi orders with the longest legacy, the most beautiful legacy of approaching God as the beloved and incorporating music. Music which is not banging on a drum, it's not plucking away at a string of a guitar or a tar, but music which always is seen and experienced as the sound of the movement of the heavens. That's how music has been interpreted in our tradition. So we're going to begin, with your permission, by listening to about 2 minutes of a sacred example of music. Oh, actually, I have to share the screen and share the sound. There we go. Let me know if you all can hear this. So, you would, of course, recognize the sound of the ney, the reed flute, something akin to a bamboo that is plucked and is cut away from its homeland, and it has to be made hollow before the breath can flow through it, producing that hauntingly beautiful sound of the ney. The teachings from Maulana Rumi that we're going to be sharing today in honor of his anniversary have very much to do with that same theme of returning to one's original home. As Pir Murshid Hazrat Inayat Khan says, we come from a perfect source and we are bound for a perfect goal. We come from God and we are destined to return to the embrace of the same beloved. And yet, when many of us think about that theme of return, it's anything but joyful. Ours, ironically, paradoxically, a time in the world which is characterized by so much violence, so much animosity, so much unwillingness to live together in peace and harmony, is a time in which we are almost uniquely unwilling to meditate on the transient nature of life. Why is it that when it comes to our great sages, the great Sufi masters, what is celebrated from them is not their birthday, and it's not even the day that they might have become illuminated, but it's actually the anniversary of their passing. The Urs, the anniversary, is the time where the soul returns back to the ocean of divinity. This is one of the great gifts that Rumi has to give us. It is one thing to have lived a beautiful life, but it's another thing to think about a beautiful death, a beautiful passing. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today. We have a lot of wonderful stories from Rumi's life. As I've mentioned before, about 800 pages of stories from his life, authentic sources that are verifiable, unlike most of what you see attributed to Rumi on Facebook and Instagram. And we know that towards the end of his life, that this was a time of incredible sorrow for his family and his community. They were not sorrowful because of what they thought was going to happen to Rumi. They were sorrowful because they had experienced him as an extraordinary gate to God. I think if many of us pause to think about this, we can experience people in our own lifetime. It might have been a teacher or a parent who has been so extraordinarily important in our own spiritual development that the idea of being on earth without them is painful. Each of the prophets, of course, was experienced in the same way. And so around this time where Rumi's in his late 60s, which back then was considered fairly advanced age, people didn't tend to live quite as long as some of us might do today. His community came to him and one of them said, "I hope that you get to live 300 years. Right? And it was said with the fullness of sweetness. And Rumi looked at him and simply said, "Why? Why would you want me to live 300 years? Do you think I'm some kind of pharaoh who searches for immortality. And then he offers this beautiful example. He says, I've only been sent into this world in order to liberate spirits. As long as we can come and liberate people from the bonds of the ego and return them to the embrace of the beloved, that's a life that is well lived. It is hoped, he says, that the return to the beloved will soon take place, right? So rather than this death that we fear so often, he describes it as a return to the embrace of the beloved, right? What would it be like for any of us to be able to take to heart this notion that there's this wonderful insight from our tradition? You oftentimes hear this when the news of the passing of someone is brought to you. The statement that is said, the Prophet Muhammad says this, and Rumi says this, and all of our sages have said this. Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. We come from God, and we are always returning to God. The difference between a Rumi, or an Ibn Arabi, or a Mu'in-ud-Din Chishti, and, well, frankly, the rest of us, is that most of us say that when we hear that someone has passed away. Oh, we come from God and we're returning to God. Someone like a Rumi recognizes that the return to the beloved is taking place in every breath. It is not an event at the end of one's earthly existence. The analogy that our friends use is we're like a stream that has come from the ocean and is returning to the ocean. Imagine what your life would be like if, rather than fear and trepidation about what's going to happen at the moment of death or what the process of death might be like, if we actually live in a state of serenity of being with the beloved, that here we are with the friend, and there we will be with the friend. As Rumi says at one point, it's just like changing rooms. The veil of mortal existence is lifted. And he talked about it in a way that is so endearing, is so sweet, is so gentle. So if you know the lives of the Muslim saints, you know that many of them were particularly affectionate towards animals. I don't know what happened along the way to our Muslim friends to have us have such terrible relationships with dogs and cats in particular, but back then, many of them lived with these friends, and Rumi had a cat. And as he got to be towards, I'm not making these up, by the way, like these are all written down in the 800-year-old books. So Rumi had a cat, and he was very fond of this cat. And towards the end of his life, in those last few days, the cat started moaning in this horrible, horrible way. And if you have a cat, maybe it's hungry or maybe it needs something, you know what that terrible moaning is like. And everybody's trying to figure out what's wrong with this cat. They're trying to be with Rumi in all seriousness. And here's this cat. And Rumi says, I know what's wrong because we speak with one another. And everybody's like, so what is he saying? And Rumi says, well, the cat is telling me you, my friend, are going to return to that same lofty kingdom from which you have come from. Amma mane bichare, but poor wretched me, what's going to happen to me after you leave? So there's also this kind of humor in that moment and a sweetness that sometime after Rumi has passed away, the cat also passes away. So what are you going to do with Rumi's cat? Well, they give it a burial worthy of a saint. They wrap it in a shroud and they bury it in the same cemetery that Rumi and his family have been buried in. So if you ever have a chance to go to Konya and you are offering your salams and your greetings to these illuminated women and men, know that there's also an illuminated cat that is also buried there, because everything has a soul. Everything has a spirit. There's another time that Rumi's very close friend Sadruddin comes, and Sadruddin says, "Oh, may God grant you cure, and may God keep you with us for centuries, and may God do this, and may God do that." And Rumi says, you know, that first one that you said, the may God grant you cure, that one is enough for me. The rest of it you keep to yourself. And since the two of them have this friendship, he says, imagine this. And this is a beautiful, sensual, even erotic language, which is, of course, there quite a lot in Rumi's poetry. And he says, imagine a husband and wife, a lover and beloved, who are embracing each other in bed. The only thing that stands between them is a shirt, a nightshirt that one of them is wearing, right? And he's very gracious with the language. He doesn't go into detail. He says, before there is union, the nightshirt has to be removed. And then he turns to Sadruddin, to his friend, and he says, why do you not wish for me to remove the nightshirt of earthly life so that I can embrace my beloved? Right? What if that experience of passing is not only one of a river flowing home into the ocean, of the perfect source returning to the perfect goal, but of a lover returning to the embrace of the beloved? And in a beautiful way that he talks about this, again, those of us who have a familiarity with the teachings of Hazrat Inayat Khan, you would see this. How do we imagine the angel of death visiting us? Well, in some traditions, we're told that it might be a really terrifying moment. It might be taking this terrible, awful, awesome personality. Rumi says that in that last few moments of his life, there is a particularly luminous, beautiful young person who shows up in the room and says, I've come to accompany you home. And the way that Rumi approaches that moment is that he offers a song. It's the last poem that he composes. He says, what am I to do? When I look on this side, they are my friends here. When I look on that side, and he can already see the world that is awaiting, there is Shams, and there is my father, and there is my mother, and they're all the ones who have ever loved me, awaiting me. What if we were to sit with this notion? We don't want to expedite the return beyond what God has written for us. That's not necessarily recommended in our tradition. But what if our approach to death was that we are having an opportunity to be welcomed by all the ones who have ever loved us before, by the ancestors, perhaps if your parents have gone before you. We know this from a teaching of the Blessed Prophet This was a comfort that he offered once to those parents who have had to do what may no parent ever have to do, which is to bury their own child. And he told them that I assure you that that child will go and prepare abodes of light for you. What if death could be a time of being welcomed by your parents, by your ancestors, by your teachers? When we break into our small groups in a moment, I'm gonna ask you to think about and to share with one another in a little bit what has been some experiences of joy that you might have received from Rumi's teachings and Rumi's poetry, perhaps something from today. What is it that when you open it up and you look inside it, there is an ease and a serenity that is brought to you? I'll read for you a poem that Maulana composes towards this last few days. He says, you know, when my time comes and they're carrying my body to the cemetery, I don't want anybody to walk behind crying. And he says at one point, if you're going to come, bring an instrument, sing and dance, because this is a joyous occasion. فروش شدن چو بدیدی برآمدن بنگر غروب شمس و قمر را چرا زیان باشد کدام دانه فرو رفت در زمین که نرست چرا به دانه انسانت این گمان باشد. You have seen my descent. You've seen them lower my body into the ground. Now come see me rise. When have the sun and the moon ever been harmed by setting? The sun sets every day and it rises. What seed is there that when trusted to the earth does not rise? Why do you doubt that we as humans are like this? You keep thinking that I have gone into the soil. Look, the 7 heavens are under my feet. Look, I am in ascension. I am in a mi'raj, right? As the prophet, the blessed prophet, ascends to see the face of God, this is our calling. This is our destiny. And indeed, this is the meaning of a poem of Rumi, which at times has been really misunderstood. It's a famous poem, از جمادی مردم و نامی شدم و از نما مردم به حیوان برزنم. I died as a mineral and was born as a plant. I died as a plant and I rose to the animal realm. I died as an animal and was born as an Adam, as a human. پس چه ترسم؟ کی از مردن کم شدم؟ Why should I fear? When have I ever been made less through dying? Once more I shall die as a human and soar with angels blessed. But even from angelhood, I must pass on. كل شيء هالك إلا وجهه. Everything passes away except the face of God. I shall become what no mind has ever conceived. Pas Adam gardam. I'm going to return back into that pre-existent state. Guyadam ke inna ilayhi raji'un. This is when they will say, he has returned to God. Sometimes there's been a rather unfortunate understanding of this verse that Rumi was somehow Darwin before Darwin, that he was prefiguring evolution. And as my darling wife, Karina, says, that's unfortunate. That's one of the worst things you can ever say about someone or something. That's unfortunate. It's unfortunate because it goes to show you nothing against science, but a kind of scientific thinking that we think the worth and the value that someone or something has is the extent to which they can prefigure some theory of modern science. Rumi is not there to teach you about evolution. It's this notion that the human being is that all-comprehensive manifestation of the divine. In you, in me, in us, there's something of the mineral realm. There's something of the plant realm, the animal realm, and that we want to bring each one of these realms to a completion. And with each death, there is a higher resurrection. So sorrow not, grieve not. And in this analogy that he loves it, he says, well, you might see the body being lowered into the ground was Yusuf, alayhi salam, was Joseph, also not dropped into the well. And he too rises in that prophetic, luminous state. There's more that one could say, but let us pause here. No, actually, I lie. There's one more that I have to say. It would be a pity if I didn't share this one with you. So the last lament that we have about Rumi's return to the ocean of God is actually from his wife, his beloved wife, Kira Khatun. And we've got wonderful stories about the tenderness of their marriage. It's actually quite beautiful. Towards the end of his life, she is just utterly in a state of sadness. And she goes around and saying, you are the light of the whole world to me. You are the secret in my breath. You are the soul of humanity. Where am I going to find somebody else like you? Where am I ever going to find another love like you? It's a very intimate moment of a husband and wife that is shared. And Rumi writes her a poem. It's a very touching one. And this really is the last story about his passing, his beautiful passing that I'll share. He says, in this life, I have had two attachments. There's been the attachment to the body, when my soul entered the body, and there's the attachment to you. The good news is that very soon, I will let go of the attachment to the body so that my soul can return to God. But know this, the only thing that will remain is my attachment to you, which is eternal and will never waver. The attachment to you will remain forever, and I will still be yours. That's a heck of a goodbye poem. I mean, Rumi's like set the bar up here for how we are to treat one another. So, my friends, I know that some of you are joining us for the first time, and you've taken a little bit of a leap in being with us, and I appreciate the good faith with which you've joined us. For every one of these chai, love, and prayers, we're gonna have 4 little seasons, 4 little segments. We'll start by grabbing a cup of chai and attuning ourselves by listening to some piece of sacred music. Then there will be a sohbat, a teaching from this beautiful tradition. Every month we will have a theme. The theme for this month coincided with Rumi's passing. The theme for next month might well be, we'll see, inshallah, but might well be the Sufi interpretation of the birth of Jesus and the experience of Mary. Has nothing to do with Santa Claus, nothing to do with Christmas trees, nothing to do with that strangely pagan European landscape. But it's a beautiful and majestic experience, and there will be some stories from Rumi as well as the Quran there. Then we will move into a time for fellowship. And if you are new to our gatherings, let me share with you part of what that session will look like. We'll break into some small groups. Some people have described these as talking circles. I want us to approach them as listening circles. So there'll be 4 or 5 people in each group. We're going to take about 15 minutes to be together. Nobody is in charge. Nobody is the guide. Nobody is the guru. Nobody is the therapist. Nobody is the counselor. Nobody is the omniscient voice of God. We're sitting together in a circle, and each of us will speak for about 2 minutes. If some of us really start enjoying the sound of our voice, and the 2 minutes becomes 3, and the 3 is about to come 4, well, then the other ones simply can unmute themselves and say, thank you. Thank you. And that's a sign that it's about time to switch to the next person. We're not here to offer spiritual advice and guidance to one another. We're not here to say, oh, you know, if you do this, I think all your problems are going to be solved. We're here to witness one another. We're here to, if I was more clever, I would make a really cool pun by saying we witness one another and we practice witness. But I'm not quite that clever. Being together, listening, receiving, honoring one another. If you have had a lifetime of experience with the theme of that day, in this case, Rumi, share one sweet fruit from it. If this is your first time ever hearing of Rumi, talk about maybe something in our conversation that touched you. And if this is the same point that others have brought up, mazel tov. The more, the merrier. Right? One of the most beautiful things about being Muslim is that the repetition of a truth does not dull the luminosity. And after about 10, 15 minutes or so, I will ask us to come back, and then we will ease into the last phase of our practice, which is a very simple spiritual practice that we will do, a simple zikr. And if this is new for you, fear not. We will try to build on these practices so that there's a sense of deepening the teachings. I am gonna stop the recording when we go into the small groups. So the small groups are completely private. And the first parts, the music and the sohbat session, those are recorded, and I will put them on the secure website that only you would have access to it. I do encourage you, if at all possible, when you're in your small groups, to have your videos on. It's a little weird to be talking intimately about matters of heart and soul into a black screen. It's okay if for the sohbat sessions or the zikr sessions you feel like you would prefer to have them off, and I honor that. But I think for those small groups which are not recorded, it just helps to create a sense of intimacy amongst you and among us. So with your permission, I'm gonna go and open up the break rooms. Go ahead and accept them so that you can magically be transported into a time of fellowship. And we'll see you again in about 10 to 15 minutes or so for our practice. So see you shortly. In just about another few seconds or so, we should have most of our friends hopefully coming back. Let's give them a chance to finish their conversations. You all survive? Wonderful. Those of you who have had an opportunity to be with us for a few months while we've been doing these sessions, we've gone from, oh no, I can't imagine having to like see people and talk to people to, you know, yeah, a few minutes was not bad and a couple more minutes would be good. And then, you know, once we got to 7-8 minutes, it was like, oh, you know, 10 minutes would be great. And now we're inching our way towards 15, and people are, for the most part, I think the experience has been that they're enjoying a chance to have a sense of fellowship and a little bit of connection with like-minded and like-hearted friends. So I hope that that is your experience as well. There is a sense of adab that we are working to cultivate. It's a sense of refinement. It's a sense of honoring, not about formality and formal rules, but about bringing that sense of dignity that is already present in one another. It's that sense of attunement to the light and the breath that is with one another and in one another. That's what we are hoping to be able to practice. And like anything else, it comes with it's a virtue that has to become a habit, right? This is the old wisdom of find what it is that brings you closer to God and then do it again and again and again until it becomes a habit. There's that sense of, people sometimes talk about muscle memory, but what if there was an eye memory, an ear memory, a tongue memory, and most of all, of course, the heart memory. So the last of the practices that we're going to be engaging in is a zikr, which is a remembrance of the one, remembrance of God. We are told in our tradition that we remember God and God remembers us, that we are cultivating that sense of awareness. Of course, God is always with us. God is omnipresent. We are the ones who are sometimes missing in action. We are the ones who are somehow scattered. And indeed, in some of the prayers that in our tradition we recite, we ask God not to abandon us to ourselves for a blink of an eye. So it's that sense of the ultimate withness, the ultimate sense of togetherness. And there are many different forms of zikr, forms of remembrance in different Sufi traditions. Sometimes they are vocalized. Sometimes it's a silent form of meditation. In some teachings, it might be accompanied with a little bit of music or even poetry. In other cases, it might be something quite somber. The particular teachings that have been helpful for me, and I'm sharing them with you, they draw on both the teachings of Rumi, the Mevlevi tradition, and also the South Asian tradition of the Chishtis, particularly through the legacy of Hazrat Inayat Khan. So these are the two that we're going to be combining. And if this is your first session being with us, what we're going to be starting with is a focus on the breath. And then we will add to it a very simple practice of the most basic of the zikrs, which is also the highest one, the La ilaha illallah, that there is one reality, there is one truth, and that is the very being of God. So let's see what it is that we're kind of trying to get to. Let me, this is kind of hopefully an amusing one for you. Many of you will recognize this image, right? This is Jesus, or as I like to call him affectionately, White Jesus. This is White Jesus chasing the money changers away from the temple. Now, the money changers have a role to play, even if they might have charged people too much interest, but not there, not in the house of God. And Jesus has a Jamali side and a Jalali side, a side of beauty, but also a side that can be majestic. Right? So if you're familiar with the biblical account, he's kicking over the tables of the money changers. So what does that have to do with a zikr? As we practice these teachings and we get to the zikr of La ilaha illallah, there is nothing that is worthy of worship except for God. Nothing worthy of adoration except for God. It's an invitation for each of us to explore what is it that has been like a money changer in our own heart. The heart that is the ultimate temple, the heart that is the ultimate house of God, the house of God that is not made out of clay and stone, but is this heart right here. What is it that has cluttered our heart? What is it that has assumed a place of significance beyond what it deserves? So we have to sweep away in order to have the breath flow, in order to have the divine presence restored into that temple. There's another beautiful image. Let me see if I can also show you that one. You might have seen the Jesus and the money changer one, but most of you probably have not seen this. So this is an example from the Ottoman tradition, which was for centuries, of course, the seat of the Sunni legacy. And the Ottomans did have a tradition of offering beautiful works of devotion depicting key scenes in the lives of the prophets, starting with Adam and going through Hazrat Muhammad. And this is the scene in which the prophet is cleansing the Kaaba, removing the idols of stone, sometimes in the form of animals. And since it was a high building, at one point he asks Imam Ali to sit on his shoulder. Ali, out of his shyness, says, "Oh, my beloved Rasulullah, I could never bring myself to sit on you, to stand on your shoulders." And the Prophet says, "No, this is a necessary task." And he does. And in a famous utterance that you hear all the time in Turkish Sufism, Ali says that when I was sitting on the shoulders of the Prophet and I looked down, I realized that he is not an earthly creature, that I was looking down from the throne of God, as it were, down, that the being of the Prophet links together heaven and earth. For our purposes, what I'm going to ask us to focus on is that you don't have to do this work alone. Everything that we do in the zikr, in the cleansing of the temple, you're assisted by the Prophet, inshallah, and by the friends of God. This is not one where you single-handedly have to carve a tunnel of hope through the mountain of despair. You are enjoining the practices that have been set forth by the prophets and by the friends of God. That's the advantage of taking part in sacred practices as opposed to simply making things up as one goes along. So let us come back, and I'm mindful of the time. We're going to try generally to keep these sessions to about an hour, but this is what we're going to end with your permission. So make yourself comfortable wherever you're sitting. Some people find it easier to close their eyes, and if that's the experience for you, please feel free to do that. And we begin with the breath which is not simply air, but the breath that is presence, that is attention. It's that life-giving force. So I invite you to sit comfortably, straighten your back, and then we're going to draw in 5 or 6 deep breaths into the heart. And I want you to notice as you take in these deep breaths, how your breathing slows down. Your heart rate slows down. And with each breath, there's a sense of deepening of the breath. There's nothing to do to hold on to the breath, but just observe it. Come in and out. So let's practice that for 5 or 6 cycles of breath. Notice after a few breaths that you actually become aware of the beating of your heart. Of course, your heart has been beating all along. If it were not beating, well, it would be already en route to union with the beloved. But when we become present to our breath, then you start noticing the beating of the heart. So this time we're going to take another few cycles and experience as you breathe that beating of your heart, which is not even restricted to your chest. You might feel that pulsation through your whole chest, sometimes even through your body, the tips of your fingers or your toes. So let's take another 5 or 6 breaths. According to the Bible and the Quran Sharif, when God was forming the human being, the Adam, there was something of the earth, something of clay that was prepared, and then there was the nafakhtu fihi min ruhi. I breathed into the human something of my own spirit. So the breath mingles with divine presence. The heart is a portal where your breath and the divine breath mingle. During the course of the day, it's good to find some times where you return to simply observing your breath. And then to remember that the breath that you are inviting into your heart has already mingled with the leaves, with the clouds, over the streams, that you are not alone, that not only do you have the company of God and fellowship with the prophet and the blessing of the saints, but you are alive through a breath that connects you to trees and to rivers and to birds, that you're never alone. And the basic zikr is that fundamental declaration, La ilaha illallah. There is nothing worthy of adoration except for Allah, the God. the one, the only. It's not somehow the Islamic God against the God of another. It's the one, the one. In certain traditions, including ours, the zikr participates in the body. So your body also has a share. You could practice this and see if this is something that heightens the experience for you. And if not, then simply the repetition might be helpful. In the Indian tradition, there is a circle that one makes with the body, with the head. Even the torso is moved. And it is that sweeping motion, just as Jesus is sweeping the temple. And you start on the heart side and you move in a circle. And the phrase, I'll put these in the chat for you later. La ilaha. And then there's that illa, except, which comes down into the heart. Sometimes it is said like a lightning or like a hammer or like a bolt of light. Except for Allah, the one. La ilaha. There's nothing worthy of adoration except for Allah. These are sacred formulas. These are mantric formulas. There's something about the very sound of these words which binds us to a millennia of saintly beings and prophets who have chanted the same statements. We will talk about the mantric quality of words like Allah, which ties to the breath in a beautiful way. But we're going to just practice a few times of La ilaha illallah. Ilaha illallah. La 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 ilaha illallah. Open your eyes. Inshallah, if we are blessed to have more gatherings, every month we will welcome and introduce another step of the zikr. Eventually you will see that the La ilaha illallah becomes illallah, becomes Allah, and then simply the at the end, which is nothing other than the breath. But we start by that sweeping away, whether you're moving your head or whether you are cleansing the heart. What is it that maybe has taken on a significance more than it deserves? What has become a preoccupation? What has become a little God for us? And so we remove that which we have raised to a level of significance from the temple of the heart, so that we can return to being with the divine as we're meant to be. So, friends, going to pause us here. We are going to try to keep these sessions to about an hour. Sometimes we may run a little bit over. I wish you well in the next few weeks until we have a chance to connect again. We usually aim for the third Saturday of every month. And if we have a chance to benefit from time and fellowship with one another again, it would bring joy to me, and I pray that it may bring joy to you. May God bless you. May God make easy what has been challenging. May God bring ease and healing to you and to your loved ones. May the suffering in life also bring you back to the embrace of the One. May we remember always that the God of the valley bottom is also the God of the mountaintop. Thank you for your goodness. Thank you for your presence, for the adab, and for the sense of fellowship that we are cultivating here. Inshallah, we will have a chance to meet again. And until then, I leave you with that beautiful divine presence that is always with you, and the gift of the breath that is your divine inheritance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Omid Jan.
It's lovely to see you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sending
Assalamu
love and light.
alaikum.
Thank you,
Filling
everyone.
our hearts with joy.
Thank you.
Thank
Goodbye,
you.
everyone.
Goodbye,
Assalamu
everyone.
alaikum. Bye, everyone.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Alaikum assalam.
Thank
Merry
you so
Christmas.
much.
تشكر.
Salam.
Teşekkür.